"What have we got?" the detective asked as he stepped into the building, thanking a technician who passed him a pair of plastic gloves. His partner, Donovan, sidled up next to him and pulled out his small notebook with a measure of gravitas. "Double homicide, it looks like. Presented as a murder-suicide at first, till we realized there was no way the other could have inflicted the killing blow to themselves. We'll know more once forensics are done." They stepped through several rooms, each adorned with obscure paintings hung in ornate frames. They all look so dark, not visually appealing in any way, and seem to cast a pall on the residents. His partner catches his gaze and shrugs. "No accounting for taste." The detective shrugs off the menacing feeling they give off and gets back to the case at hand. "Okay, tell me about our victims," he says as he makes a notation in his own jotter. Finally, they arrive at the crime scene. Appears to be a couple in their early 60s, both Caucasian. "What do you think?" the detective asked as he tries to navigate around the tiny yellow evidence markers on the ground. The scene is messy, paraphernalia of an unknown origin scattered around the room like confetti. One of the unsettling paintings had fallen to the ground, and in an effort to maneuver through the field of evidence, the detective's boot lightly scraped the gilt frame. His partner shot him a look of admonishment before returning his focus to his notes. Donovan had been on the scene much earlier and had more time to assess the situation. He cleared his throat. "According to what we've got so far, the time of death was sometime around 2 a.m. in the morning. I wonder what the couple was doing up at that time," the detective said as he looked down at them. "That's not the crazy part, though. Look at this," his partner said, and the detective followed the younger man's hands as he gestured at the couple's necks. Although the bodies were laid side by side, they faced away from each other and were partially covered with a dingy white sheet. "What am I supposed to be looking at?" the detective asked, and Donovan directed his attention to a specific part on the neck, which was clearly broken, the apparent cause of death for the unlucky couple. "They've been dead for 5 hours. Donovan diligently used a finger to point at the other's neck, too. "Notice how there's no bruising on the outside, indicating that the force wasn't external. It's as if their necks had broken from the inside." He then lifted the cloth around their feet. It was splotchy and bloody. The bones of their legs were broken at best, shattered at worst. "Looks like they fell from a distance," the detective said, and they both looked up at the 9-foot-high ceiling. Not high enough to cause this kind of damage. "Is this even the crime scene or just where the bodies were found?" "We'll know more when SOC's done," Donovan replied, rising to his feet while snapping shut his notebook with a tone of finality. Early the next day, the detective and his partner trudged along the gray halls of the precinct. The detective limps slightly as they make their way to the interrogation room, where the victim's daughter waited alone. "Sorry for keeping you," the detective began. "And also, I'm sorry for your loss." He pulled out his chair to sit down, but the woman just stared at them stonily. Her eyes were not wet or red from tears. In fact, she did not look at all like someone who just lost both her parents. "Detective, I would advise you not to waste your time and mine. Why am I here?" the woman deadpanned. The detective raised an eyebrow. "Forgive me if I'm wrong, but the victims are your parents, are they not?" Equally disconcerted, Donovan added, "Yeah, and I've worked this job for years, and usually when we tell someone that a loved one has been murdered, the reaction is usually different from what I'm seeing right now." "I did not kill my parents, if that's what you're implying. I haven't seen my parents in nearly 10 years, and I haven't spoken to them in almost 5. They wanted nothing to do with me, and I wanted nothing to do with them. Are we finished?" She made to stand up, but the detective raised his hand. "Please sit. So, there's no love lost between you and your parents. Fine. But you still need to answer a few questions for us." She sighed and begrudgingly took her seat. "Fine. What do you want to know?" Were your parents involved in anything dangerous enough that could have been the cause of this? She leaned close. You wouldn't believe me. The detective chuckled as he leaned back in his chair, bobbing his leg restlessly under the table. I've been doing this for a long time. You have no idea what I would or wouldn't believe. He leans over with a conspiratorial grin. So why don't you try me? She shrugged. Fine. My parents were heavily involved in the occult. And by that, I mean witchcraft. I'm not talking about that New Age crystal stuff. I'm talking curses, hexes, and summoning demons. Actually practicing witchcraft. A beat of stunned disbelief follows this statement. Are you trying to say the cause of your parents' death might not be entirely natural? She nodded solemnly. That's exactly what I'm saying. I don't need to know the details of their death to know that it's connected to their obsession with the occult. They have been looking for ways to gain more power for years. All you need to do is look around their house and you're going to find all the evidence you need. The detective scoffed. I don't know if you get how the legal system works, but we need an actual perpetrator to point the finger at. Something tangible. We cannot take the occult into the court of law. Do you understand? I don't know what you expect me to do here, detective. I've told you what I know. They were involved in the occult, and if you cannot explain their deaths, then it's very likely the occult is involved. And that's all I know. She pushes herself away from the table, crossing her arms in front of her. Also, I have a very tight alibi. I was nowhere near their home when this happened. I don't care about your investigation. Just tell me when I can collect their bodies for a funeral. Are we done now? She concludes in a huff. For now, the detective said as they both took to their feet, although he does so with much less grace. We will likely reach out to you again in the future, so please do not leave town. And if you do, let us know and give us a way to contact you. She nodded, and he led her out. This was going to be a tough nut to crack, the detective thought as he drove back to his apartment later that night. His mind wandered back to the state of the crime scene as he pulled into the parking lot. If the victims really were occult practitioners, as their daughter claimed, some of the objects they found began to make more sense, in a sinister way. He absent-mindedly scratches his ankle, mind wandering further. In all of his years on the force, he had, of course, heard about the occult before, but he had never come close to believing it. He turns off the car and suddenly notices how quiet it is. Its oppressiveness seeming to sink into his skin. He shook his head. This afternoon's interrogation had clearly gotten under his skin. But as he steps out of the car, he feels a grip made of iron wrap itself around his leg and pull hard. He falls abruptly, and his head smacks the pavement, bouncing from the force. But he hasn't stopped moving. He's being pulled backward, further underneath the car. Still dazed, the detective glances back and sees two malevolent red eyes gazing back at him. Pupils the shape of vertical slits like those of a reptile. The eyes freeze the detective, but the grip keeps tightening, more and more till the clear sounds of bones snapping can be heard. Before he can even scream, he's dragged completely under the car and disappears.
Subscribe today or